I was 32 the morning my parents told me that. They didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't even look angry. My father sat at the edge of the sofa, twisting his gold wedding band with the same mechanical calm he used when checking the locks every night. My mother stood by the window, her voice as even as a weather report. "Anna," she said, "the greatest gift you can give your brother on his wedding day is your absence." The room was quiet enough that I could hear the clock ticking behind her, slow and cruel. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg. I just packed my things, grabbed the car keys and stepped outside. The door closed behind me like a final full stop. Neat, final, absolute. Before I tell you what followed, before I tell you about the wedding that never really happened the way they dreamed it would, I should say this. If you're hearing my story, if it pulls something raw inside you, subscribe to the channel. Because I promise you, everything you're about to hear is true enough to hurt, but told with the distance that only time and vengeance can grant. The first night away from home was soaked in rain. I drove until the fuel light blinked and the wipers were fighting against sheets of water that turned the road into black glass. There's something about being disowned that makes even the sound of your own name feel like an accusation. I pulled into a roadside motel, one of those forgotten places where the neon vacancy sign buzzes like a dying fly, and sat there with my suitcase unopened on the floor. I should have cried, maybe screamed, but instead I laughed, a sharp, empty laugh that startled even me. "Congratulations, Anna," I whispered. "You've finally given your family what they always wanted." Silence. Sleep didn't come. I kept replaying the last image of my brother, Daniel. All charm and teeth, my mother's favorite, my father's pride. He'd been engaged to Clara for 6 months. Sweet, perfect Clara. The kind of woman who brought casseroles for neighbors she barely knew and posted filtered sunrise pictures with captions about grace and gratitude. They loved her instantly. And they tolerated me, their difficult daughter with opinions that didn't fit into family dinners or church picnics. I had left my job in the city after an ugly breakup, and returned home only to find that the house had already learned how to live without me. When Daniel announced his wedding, my parents said, "Finally, something beautiful to celebrate." And when Clara smiled at me across the table with that polished sweetness, she said, "We'll find a role for you, Anna." I should have known then what kind of role they meant. The next morning, I woke up to silence and the faint smell of mildew. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through social media on my phone, half expecting someone, anyone, to have noticed my absence. Nothing. Just pictures of wedding decorations, tagged at the family house. "Can't wait for Saturday," one caption read. And then Daniel's post. "3 days to go until forever begins with you, Clara." I stared at it until my phone dimmed itself to black. That was when something cold, steady, and precise clicked into place inside me. It wasn't anger. Anger burns too fast. It was something slower, the kind of emotion that plans, that watches, that counts days and details. They wanted me gone. Fine. But absence has weight. Silence has echoes. And I would make sure they learned that. I drove back toward town 2 days before the wedding. Not home. Never again home. But close enough to see the familiar skyline in the distance. I found a small rental on the edge of town, a 1-bedroom place behind a convenience store. The owner didn't ask questions, just handed me the keys after I paid cash. From there I started watching. People underestimate what you can learn by simply watching. The florist's van came and went from the house on Thursday morning. White lilies, pale roses. My mother always said lilies were for funerals, not weddings. Funny how that would turn out. By Friday the caterers arrived. Music equipment followed. Guests were arriving from out of state. Everything was a blur of white tents, laughter, and forced perfection. And me. I was invisible, just as they wanted, until I decided not to be. Late that night, when the lights from the house glowed like a small city and laughter spilled out of open windows, I parked 2 streets away and walked the rest of the distance. My old key still worked on the side gate. They hadn't thought to change it. Why would they? Their troublesome daughter had disappeared. The garden was lined with fairy lights, fragile little bulbs swaying in the warm air. I stood there, half in shadow, watching through the glass doors as Clara twirled in her dress, a rehearsal for perfection. My mother clapped. Daniel kissed her hand. My father looked proud. And I, standing outside, felt that strange mixture of love and loathing that only family can breed. Inside, the music stopped. Clara's laughter softened into a whisper I couldn't hear. She said something to Daniel and he smiled, nodding. Then he turned to my parents and said, "It'll all be perfect, Mom. As long as Anna stays far away." Laughter. Toast. My father's voice. "She knows her place now." I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just listened. Every word carving itself into me like a signature on stone. That was the night I stopped being hurt and started being patient. The wedding day came. No flowers. No music. No food. Only panic. But that's the part you'll understand soon. How a single woman with nothing left can turn an entire celebration into chaos. How love and cruelty can wear the same smile. Because I didn't need to crash their wedding to ruin it. I only needed to tell the truth. I learned early that the sharpest knives in a kitchen aren't always in the drawer. Sometimes they're words, photographs, or a short, well-timed message. I also learned that people behave differently when they think they know the script of a story. My family had thought they knew mine. The dutiful daughter who would step aside for appearances. They didn't know I'd switched scripts the moment I stepped out into the rain. I had the recording because when I stood at the garden gate that night and listened, my thumb was already on my phone. Hidden in my palm like a small, cold talisman. I pretended to be a stray cat waiting for a little pity from the house. I pretended to be nothing at all. But I recorded because sometimes truth needs a witness. The conversation was clipped and polished. The kind of cruelty that practices itself in front of mirrors. "She'll accept it," my mother had said, voice low, the words a kind of rationed kindness. "She won't cause a scene." My father, the rhythm of his voice the same as his hand on the car keys, replied, "For Daniel's sake. For the family. It's only removal." They said remove like it was a household chore. Like me as a vase to be placed out of sight. It wasn't a smoking gun of criminality. It was a mirror. It was a recording of them choosing optics over their daughter. That God help them was enough. On the Tuesday before the wedding, I sat in the rental with coffee gone cold and opened a new email account. I wrote nothing personal, nothing profane. I compiled clips. The recording, photos of my childhood juxtaposed with posts about the wedding, screenshots of messages where my parents called me unsettling and burdensome. I included images that showed the dissonance. My mother praying with a pew full of friends, then clicking unfollow when someone posted a picture of me at a protest. My father clutching a Bible in one hand and a contract with a business partner in the other. I added a little caption to the files. What they said. What they mean. I sent it to everyone listed in the wedding group chat. Friends, old neighbors, distant cousins, and to the vendors. Florist, DJ, caterer, the hall manager. I marked it urgent and left it unsigned. Then I sat back and watched the phone. The first replies were confusion. Is this real? Who sent this? Then accounts started to crack. A cousin asked for a clarification. A high school friend wrote, "Anna, are you okay?" The caterer asked for payment confirmation. The florist wanted to know about the bride's uncle who'd ordered the centerpieces. The DJ texted the venue manager. "We're not playing until final payments cleared." Panic, a faint buzz in the kitchen of my rental. It felt disgraceful, like being a child who breaks an heirloom vase to prove its cracks. But what I'd done wasn't about breaking them. It was about making visible what they'd already quietly built. A life predicated on the erasure of anyone who refused to be convenient. The night before the wedding, I drove to the perimeter of the property again. The marquee lights were up, and the air smelled like wax and sweet grass. I watched from a distance as men unloaded boxes labeled with vendor names. At the gate, I bumped into Mrs. Okoye from down the road, clutching a hamper of homemade stew for the rehearsal dinner. "Anna," she said, eyes flicking over my face. "We haven't seen you at church." There was genuine concern there, not the compassionate smugness my parents wore like perfume. "I'm here for the truth," I said. She looked at me the way people look at storms. curious then cautious. She hugged me, and I smelled the scent of her soap and felt, absurdly, forgiven by a stranger. The morning of the wedding came like a held breath. I'd never seen my mother move so fast. Hair back, face made up the way it had been for years when an event needed a performance. Daniel was laughing too loud, forcing his smile like someone polishing a trophy. Clara's bridesmaids fussed with last-minute pins. There was a softness to Clara's face when she looked at Daniel, like a sunset that the rest of the sky envies. It should have been a sanctuary of happiness. Instead it dissolved in an avalanche of small, logistical betrayals. The florist left the centerpieces in a truck outside the gate and refused to bring them in. The florist's message had been short. No payment, no delivery. Sorry. The DJ, who'd never met me, told the venue manager that his contract had been altered and his crew had been asked to provide extra equipment without the corresponding fee. He packed up. The caterers, elderly women who had trusted my mother with recipes and tithes for years, refused to proceed without a deposit that had never cleared. Guests gathered with awkward murmurs, trying to reconcile the radiant scene they'd imagined with the nervous flurry of staffers arguing by the hedge. Somebody pulled up a phone and showed a video to the groom's father. My montage of voices and images beneath the soft light. People watched the recording of my parents talking, the same voices that had cradled me through chickenpox and first kisses, and then they watched their faces change. There is a particular heat that rises in a person when their picture of someone they venerate cracks. You can see the gears turning. Denial, curiosity, disgust, betrayal. Daniel's face when he watched those clips in the foyer was not just angry. It was the thin, baffled panic of a man who realized his scaffolding was made of straw. "Who sent this?" he demanded, words brittle. He looked at my mother as if accusing a conspirator, then at the guests whose eyes were sliding between them like electric current. Is this true? My mother, who had sailed through years of social scrutiny by the grace of a steady smile, faltered. Her lips trembled, not with sorrow but with the panic of someone realizing their stage directions had been stolen. "This is," she started, but her voice shrank into a whisper. Clara stood in her dress like a statue, and for the first time I saw the age in her features. She clutched a folded note, a tiny thing with a verse about destiny. When she looked at me, I expected the glitter of triumph. Instead, there was the plain, acidic glow of hurt. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was small as a coin. "Because you were better at pretending to be good than I ever was," I thought, not saying it. "Because you all decided I was disposable. Because I wanted the people in that room to know the truth before they danced over it." The priest, a stoic man who had married my grandparents, found me by the bushes, as if a shepherd had wandered, searching. He was not a man who was easily shocked. He held my gaze with an odd tenderness and asked simply, "Anna, is there more?" I told him only what I had to, that my parents had decided my exile, that they had rehearsed it to sound like mercy. I gave him the recording. He listened, face worn as if he'd been reading sad scripture all morning. He closed his eyes, then opened them. "I will not stand at an altar where lies are used as lilies," he said quietly. "I would marry them without that, but a wedding must be truth, even if it's difficult." The word traveled the way a rumor does in a small town. It started with the priest's aides, went to the bridesmaids, then to the cluster of uncles who still thought duty meant honor. A debate flared, small, terrible in its intimacy, about what a wedding should be when the people getting married were entangled in a network of quiet cruelties. By noon, the tent was half empty. Some guests said they couldn't be present in a house that had chosen optics over a daughter. Others thought I'd gone too far. Arguments bloomed among family friends, each raising a hand to recall a different memory that either condemned or excused me. My parents stood at the center of a storm they'd sown and watched it fold in on them. And then Daniel came looking for me. I found him by the car, rain from a sudden cloudburst making his hair cling to his forehead. He looked at me like someone who has opened a letter and found himself mentioned. "You wrecked this," he said. But it wasn't the accusation that hit me so much as the tremor underneath his voice. He wanted to be angry. He wanted me to be a convenient villain so he could keep explaining away his choices. "You gave me this," I said. "You gave me the tape when you told them to make me vanish. I only gave your guests back what you gave them." He laughed then, a sound with no humor. "You could have come on the inside. You could have played your part." "I wasn't hired for a part," I told him. "I was family." Clara appeared behind him, water beading on the hem of her dress, mascara blurred into artless trails. Her face had shifted into a person who'd been forced to grow in one day what others took a lifetime to learn. She looked at Daniel with something like pleading. "Baby," she said, voice small. "What is this? Who sent this?" "You." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You're the only one who could have." "No," she said, cut off. "I don't know anything about this." Her hand landed on his arm like a question. At that moment, standing between them, under umbrellas and the monstrous white of the cancelled celebration, I realized revenge wasn't an act. It was an exposure. It was not about making them suffer in the way they'd made me suffer. It was about making them see the road they'd paved by opting for appearance over people. "You could have asked me to leave," I said. "You could have said you needed space. But you chose to speak of me like I was a thing to be removed. That's not mercy." Silence fell like a curtain. The rain softened into a hush, and even the guests who had stayed seemed to hold their breath as if the moment were a prayer in reverse. Then my father, who had spent a life steering conversations away from hard corners, cleared his throat. There was no pearl here. He did not apologize with a flourish or say the right words the way politicians say them. He looked like a man who'd misplaced the map to his own moral compass. "Anna," he said, and his voice was small without pretense. I. But the sentence stalled. There was nothing to say that fixed the fact of what happened. There was only the long, naked truth laid out on a table like a meal nobody wanted to eat. I thought of leaving then, slipping away into the rain with my suitcase and the strange lightness of someone who had finally been used for something other than a prop. Instead I stayed. I watched them look at me, and I watched their eyes find the records of themselves that I had given to others. I watched as the perfect day unraveled not with a bang but with a litany of fragile human admissions. As the sun broke through the clouds an hour later, people moved slowly, like animals reluctant to return to an appended den. The vendors packed away boxes. The guests drifted off in clumps, whispering. Clara stood under the marquee, her dress damp, her hands empty. Daniel's shoulders sagged as if the weight of his own decisions had finally shown up at the door and refused to leave. I walked away before anyone could reach me. Behind me the house, our family house, looked smaller, like a model someone had stopped wanting to play with. My phone had begun to hum with messages. Accusations, gratitude, anger, reconciliations in miniature. I didn't know what I'd feel later when the dust settled. Triumph, remorse, relief. All I knew in my chest was the patient, steady thing that had been there since the night I stepped out into the rain. A resolve like a quiet river, cold and sure. They had asked for a vanishing. I had given them truth. Only truth, I learned, can make a whole celebration disappear. I didn't drive far that afternoon. Just to the edge of the next town. A nowhere place with a single diner and a motel that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. I checked in under my middle name, laid my phone face down on the nightstand, and stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me. The silence after a storm has its own sound. It's not peace. It's the slow groan of a house remembering what's still standing. By evening the messages came. "Daniel, you've destroyed everything. Mother, we can fix this, but you must take that video down. Father, please come home, we can talk." That word again. Like an old song that once made sense but now only hurt the ears. I didn't reply. I just scrolled, watching their words pile up like leaves around a grave. Somewhere, in another world, the wedding had turned into an emergency family meeting. I could imagine it. Guests murmuring, Clara's makeup running, my father's face pale as paper. What none of them knew was that I hadn't sent the video to ruin them. I'd sent it to reveal them, to themselves first. But truth doesn't choose how it burns. It just does. By midnight, the story was already spreading. Small towns thrive on gossip the way lungs thrive on air. A cousin's friend's neighbor posted about the scandal at the wedding, and within hours the whole community had theories. She must have done it for money. No, she was always the strange one. Did you hear the parents made her leave the house? I watched from the outside, detached, weightless, like a ghost reading her own obituary. 2 days later my mother called. I didn't answer the first time. Or the second. The third time I picked up. Anna. Her voice was softer than I remembered, stripped of that polite steel she wore like perfume. We need to talk. About what? Yes. The gift you asked me to give. My vanishing. Please don't be cruel, she said. You don't understand what we were trying to protect. I finished for her. Who exactly were you protecting, Mom? There was a long silence. I could almost hear her breathing, trying to decide which version of herself to be. Your father is sick, she said finally. The stress, it's been too much. I almost laughed. So now it's my fault he's sick? No, she said quickly. I want you to come home. Please. That word, please, landed like a pebble dropped into still water. I hadn't heard it from her mouth since I was a teenager refusing to attend church one Sunday. Back then, it sounded like a threat disguised as a request. Now it sounded different. Uncertain, almost frightened. Why? I asked quietly. Because you're sorry. Or because people are watching. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. Hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain started again, whispering against the motel window like an old song. I thought about the look on Daniel's face when the video played. The shock, the confusion, the realization. For years I had let him be the golden child, the one who never did wrong. He never needed to apologize. The world apologized for him. But I wasn't a child anymore. And he wasn't golden. The next morning I drove back toward town, not to the house but to Clara's apartment. She lived above a florist's shop, which felt like irony in its purest form. The same shop that had refused to deliver the wedding flowers. She opened the door before I could knock twice. Her eyes were swollen, her hair unbrushed, her engagement ring gone. Anna, she said, half surprised, half exhausted. You shouldn't be here. I know, I said. But I wanted to talk. She let me in. The apartment smelled like lilies and dust. I didn't do it to hurt you, I began. You didn't deserve. She cut me off with a small, bitter laugh. You think I didn't know who they were? That caught me off guard. What? Your family, she said, collapsing onto the couch. Anna, I grew up in this town. Everyone knows the stories. I just thought I could be the exception. I thought if I smiled enough, agreed enough, I'd be safe. She looked up at me, eyes shining with something between anger and relief. But maybe we're both just survivors of the same house. I sat down across from her, speechless. She continued, voice shaking now. Daniel told me things. About you. About how you were unstable, jealous, vindictive. I believed him. I shouldn't have. The words hit harder than I expected. I'd known they'd lied about me, but hearing it from her, hearing that she'd built her trust on my ashes, was something else entirely. I wanted to ruin them, I admitted. Not you. Never you. Clara nodded slowly. Maybe they needed to be ruined. Maybe that's the only way people like them learn. We sat in silence for a long time. Then she asked, almost shyly, "What will you do now?" I didn't know. For the first time in years I had no plan, no next move. I just knew I couldn't keep orbiting their world like a ghost chained to history. When I stood to leave, she said, "They're selling the house." Froze. What? They can't stay there. Too many people know. Too many whispers. She gave a small, humorless smile. They said the walls feel haunted. Haunted. Maybe they were. Not by spirits, by silence, by what they'd done by me. A week later I went back. Not inside. Just to see it. The for sale sign leaned against the front gate. The once perfect lawn was overgrown. Windows dark. Curtains gone. The house that had been a fortress of pride was now a hollow thing, waiting for someone else's story. I stood there for a long time, keys in my hand, heart steady. The ghosts were quiet now. Maybe because they knew I'd finally listened. Then, without ceremony, I tossed the old house key into the tall grass. That was my ending. Not revenge, release. As I walked away, I realized something. They had exiled me to give my brother a perfect wedding. And in doing so, they'd given me freedom instead. Sometimes, vanishing is the beginning of everything. For weeks after the house sold, I moved through days like someone learning a new language. The silence no longer frightened me. It felt like clean air after smoke. I started working part-time at the florist's shop under Clara's apartment. Strange how life folds back on itself. Trimming stems, arranging color into order. My hands smelled of green things again. People came in who'd known my family. Some avoided my eyes. Others spoke softly as if grief clung to me like pollen. But one afternoon Mrs. Okoye, the neighbor who'd hugged me in the rain, placed a small pot of lavender on the counter. "You plant this," she said, "and every time it grows back, you remember that burning doesn't end a root." I smiled, the real kind, not the polite one I'd practiced for years. The shop kept me grounded. There was a rhythm to it. Water, cut, tie, deliver. The owner, an elderly man named Felix, never asked questions. He just taught me how to listen to flowers, which I learned means paying attention to what wilts first. One morning a customer left an envelope for me. No name. Just for Anna. Inside was a short note. "The house is gone. The name on the mailbox isn't ours anymore. I hope you can forgive us someday or at least forget us. Ed." The handwriting trembled. For a moment I felt the old anger rise, hot and quick. Then it dissolved into something quieter. Maybe age had finally taught him that love built on control was no love at all. I folded the note and placed it beneath the lavender pot. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a gift you hand someone. It's the weight you stop carrying. Daniel came by the shop 2 months later. I saw him through the window first. Same posture, same expensive shoes, but the lightness around him was gone. When he stepped inside, the smell of roses made the moment strangely gentle. "Clara told me you work here," he said. His voice was rougher, as if truth had scraped something raw in him. "She's doing okay," I said, though it wasn't a question. He nodded. "She left me." I only raised an eyebrow. "She said she needed to find herself," he continued. "Maybe she'll come back. Maybe she won't." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You always did prefer honesty over comfort." I wiped my hands on my apron. "What do you want, Daniel?" "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For believing them. For what I said about you. For the wedding. For everything." I studied his face. Still handsome, still familiar, but softer somehow, humbled. "You lost more than a wedding that day," I said. He nodded. "And maybe that's what I needed." There was a pause that didn't hurt. "I hope you're happy, Anna," he said finally. "I'm getting there." He smiled once. Not the performative kind I remembered, but something human, and left without another word. After that, the seasons began to turn. Spring arrived with thunder and sudden green. I moved into a small cottage behind the shop, painted the walls pale yellow, and filled the windowsills with cuttings that refused to die. Sometimes I caught myself humming, an old childhood tune that used to echo through the family house before silence became our language. At night, I'd sit on the porch and write letters I never sent. To my mother, about how pride is the most expensive furniture in any home. To my father, about how fear breeds cruelty in people who think they're being kind. To Daniel, about how forgiveness doesn't mean returning, it means moving. Then I'd burn them in a tin bowl, watching the paper curl into ash. The smoke never smelled bitter, only clean like rain after dust. Months later, Clara visited. She wore her hair shorter, her smile unforced. "I got a job out of town," she said, standing amid buckets of tulips. "Starting over." "I'm glad," I said and meant it. She hesitated. "You know, Everyone thinks what you did was revenge. It was survival, I said. She nodded slowly. And survival looks good on you. We laughed, soft and genuine. Two women who had walked through the same fire from opposite ends and met in the middle. She bought a small bouquet, lavender and white daisies, and before leaving she turned back. For what it's worth, you gave me the courage to leave him. After she was gone, I stood there for a long time, feeling the sun on my face. Maybe that was the real ending. Not the collapse of a wedding, but the rebuilding of two women who refused to stay buried under someone else's idea of loyalty. Sometimes customers ask me why I like lilies so much. I tell them they remind me that beauty and mourning can share the same stem. And when I close the shop each evening, I whisper to the flowers the same words I told myself the night I walked away from that house. They asked for my vanishing. I gave them my becoming. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about growth. Wild, uninvited, unstoppable. It's been a year since the wedding that never was. People in town don't whisper anymore. Not about me, not about my family. Time has that kind of mercy. It dulls even the sharpest gossip. The florist shop has become my home in more ways than one. There's a peace that comes with knowing exactly who you are, and not needing anyone's permission to be it. Sometimes when customers recognize my name, they hesitate, waiting for the rumor to surface, for me to confirm or deny it. I just smile and say, "Yes, that Anna." Then I go back to arranging flowers. The truth doesn't frighten me anymore. It never should have. I've learned that revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's a mirror, one you hold up until people are forced to see themselves. And sometimes, the best revenge is walking away so completely that the person who hurt you can no longer recognize your absence as loss, only as peace. There are days I still think about the family house. I imagine the new owners repainting the walls, planting fresh flowers where my mother once scolded me for stepping on the grass. I picture laughter spilling out of those windows again. Not the brittle kind that hides secrets, but real laughter, the kind that forgives the walls for what they've heard. And maybe, somewhere in another town, my parents have started over too. Maybe they sit quietly in the evenings, no longer trying to perform goodness, just living it in small, clumsy ways. Hope so. Because hatred, like any inheritance, only grows if you water it. And I've stopped watering mine. One afternoon, while sweeping the shop, Felix handed me a small envelope. "No sender," he said. Inside was a single photograph. Me as a child, sitting on the front steps of the old house, barefoot, smiling, my brother's arm around me. On the back, in my father's handwriting, "We remember you in the morning light. Be well, Anna." I didn't cry. I just placed it on the shelf between two vases and whispered, "I already am." Some nights I record short stories for the little podcast I started. The same channel where I first told my story. I sit by the window, microphone glowing faintly, my voice steady now. The listeners write in, people I'll never meet, saying things like, "You told my story too," or "I thought I was the only one." And that's when I realize, the real power of a story isn't in revenge or justice. It's in recognition. In the moment someone out there hears you and thinks, "I'm not alone anymore." If you're still listening, if you've made it this far, maybe that someone is you. So I'll say it again, not for fame, not for pity, but for truth. Subscribe if you believe in beginnings disguised as endings. Because that's what this was. Not the story of what they took from me, but of what I found when they did. Sometimes when the shop is quiet and the air smells like rain and petals, I catch a memory out of the corner of my mind. My mother humming in the kitchen, my father fixing the radio, Daniel laughing too loud. For a heartbeat I miss them. And that's okay. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without wanting to return. I close the shop, lock the door, and step into the evening. The streetlights hum softly, and the world feels open, wide, unpunished. Maybe that's the real gift my family gave me. Not exile, not pain, but a blank page. And on that page I write my own ending.